The council chamber of the Varith Empire was cold. Not cold the way space was cold, but cold the way people who had stopped feeling things made everything around them cold. Princess Vaylith Sulkarath stood in the center of that chamber. She stood straight, her silver-blue skin catching the overhead light, her long dark eyes moving slowly from one council member to the next. There were 12 of them, seated in a high curved row, looking down at her like she was something beneath their attention. She was not beneath anyone's attention. She was the third heir to the Varith throne. She had trained for 17 years in diplomacy, combat strategy, and imperial law. She had carried the royal seal on 7 official missions and had never once failed. Not until now, except she hadn't failed this one either. The Yeren system was a quiet cluster of 3 inhabited planets on the outer edge of Varith-controlled space. Vaylith had spent 4 months there, working carefully and patiently to build a trade agreement between the Empire and the Yaren people. It had been real work, learning their customs, sitting through long meals, earning trust slowly the way trust was meant to be earned. The agreement had been signed. The celebrations had started. And then the station blew up. Not all of it, but enough. Enough to kill 41 Yaren officials and 3 members of Vaylith's own escort. Enough to shatter the trade agreement and send the Yaren people into grief and rage. Enough to make every other allied system in the region go quiet and nervous. The investigation had found traces of a specific Varith military-grade explosive in the wreckage, a type of charge that, according to the Council's official report, had been logged under Vaylith's mission authorization codes. She had not ordered any such thing. She knew it with every part of herself. The Council was not interested in what she knew. High Counselor Marin, a thin old man whose voice sounded like dry paper being torn slowly, read the findings out loud without once looking at her. Dereliction of mission security. Failure to protect Allied personnel. Conduct unbecoming of a royal envoy. The words came one after another like stones dropping into water, and each one landed without feeling. Vaylith had prepared to speak. She had spent 3 days writing out everything, every timeline, every decision she had made, every person who had been with her. She had names, she had records, she had a case. Counselor Marin did not give her the floor. The decision had already been made before she walked in. She could see it in the way not one of them met her eyes. She could see it in the empty seat where her older brother, Crown Prince Doran, was supposed to sit. Doran had not come. His people were already here, seated above her in a row, wearing the Empire's colors and holding its judgment in their hands. The sentence was exile. Not imprisonment, not a formal trial with witnesses and evidence and the chance to fight back. Exile. A clean and quiet removal. Her royal seal was deactivated right there in the chamber. Her access to Imperial networks was cut off. Her escort fleet was reassigned to another mission. She was given her personal ship, a mid-sized diplomatic courier called the Solène, and 72 hours to leave Varith-controlled space. She did not cry. She would not give them that. She walked out of the chamber on her own feet, back straight, head level, and she did not look behind her once. Her attendant, Saris, was waiting just outside the doors. Saris was an older being, soft-spoken, careful, with pale green skin and wide amber eyes that always seemed to be thinking ahead of the moment. He had served her family for over 30 years. When Vaylith told him he did not have to come with her, he had picked up his travel case without a word and walked toward the ship. They left that same evening. Vaylith sat in the pilot's seat of the Solène and watched the lights of the Empire's central station grow smaller in the rear display. She watched until they were nothing but distant points of light among all the other distant points of light, and then she turned away and looked at the charts instead. She had no orders, no mission brief, no one waiting for her arrival anywhere. For the first time in her life, There was nothing scheduled for tomorrow. No purpose had been handed to her. The shape of her days had always been given to her from above, and now that shape was just gone. It was, she realized, the most frightening thing she had ever felt. Not the explosion, not the council's judgment. This, the open, empty nothing, of no direction. Saris brought her a cup of warm red tea and sat down in the co-pilot's chair. He did not speak. He was very good at sitting without speaking, and she had always taken it for granted. Now she was grateful for it in a way she couldn't put into words. She pulled up the navigation charts and looked at her options. Going back toward Vareth space was impossible. Any Allied system would report her within hours. The Outer Rim colonies were loyal to the Empire in ways she couldn't predict. That left one direction: the Gray Corridor, a long stretch of unregulated space between 3 different star territories, claimed by none of them, watched by none of them. It was where traders went when they didn't want to be tracked, where criminals went when they needed to vanish. It was dangerous and lawless, and offered no protection to anyone. But it was the only direction that did not lead back to Doron. She set the course and let the ship's system take over. Then she leaned back and stared at the ceiling for a long time. She thought about the Yaren dead. She thought about Seuss, an elder who had pressed a small woven token into her hands on the very first day of negotiations as a sign of welcome. The token was still in her coat pocket. Seuss had been on the station when it went up. She pressed her hand flat against her pocket. She knew Doron had done this. She had no proof, only the shape of things, the way he had always resented her growing reputation as a diplomat, the way her real relationships with Allied systems made him nervous. She had been building something that didn't depend on fear or imperial pressure. That kind of thing made people like Doron feel small. She was out here with a personal ship, no rank, no seal, no allies, and no standing. Knowing meant nothing without proof, and proof was back inside the Empire, where she was no longer allowed to go. "You should sleep," Sarah said quietly from the other chair. "It is a long passage." Valith looked at him. "Do you think I was wrong?" she asked. "About anything? Any part of the Yaren mission?" Saris was quiet for a moment. He always took questions seriously. "No," he said at last. "I think you were exactly right. And I think that is precisely why this happened to you." She turned back to the window. Outside, the stars stretched out in long, slow streaks as the ship picked up speed, pulling away from everything she had ever known. She had been right, and it had cost her everything. For now, she told herself, only for now. The Gray Corridor was not a nice place to be. Valith had known that before she entered it, but knowing a thing and living inside it were different. The corridor was wide, mostly empty, and deeply quiet in a way that felt less like peace and more like something holding its breath. There were no patrol ships here, no beacon markers, no signals from any empire or authority. There were only drifting rocks, broken old station fragments, and the occasional distant flicker of a ship running without identification lights. She had been in the corridor for 2 days when the raiders found her. She was not sure how they spotted the Solen. Her ship was not broadcasting anything. She had shut off all non-essential systems and was running as quiet as a ship could run. But raiders in the Gray Corridor had been working these lanes for years. They knew what a diplomatic courier looked like, even when it was trying not to look like one. 4 ships came out of the dark without warning. They were rough-built things, welded together from salvage, burning hot drives that left orange trails in the sensor display. They surrounded the Solonen in a loose formation and opened a hailing channel with no greeting and no introduction. A voice, flat and bored, told her to cut her engines, unlock her cargo bay, and make no transmissions. Valith looked at Saris. Saris looked at the sensor display. Neither of them had much to say. She had combat training. She had trained in Varith hand-to-hand forms since she was 12 years old, and she was good at it. But the Solanin was a diplomatic ship. It had 2 small defensive turrets and a light shield system meant to deflect debris, not absorb weapons fire. She was outnumbered 4-1, and the ships surrounding her were carrying weapons built to hurt things much bigger than hers. She did not cut the engines. She did not unlock the cargo bay. She angled the ship slightly and looked for gaps in the formation, running numbers in her head. The numbers were not good. And then something happened that her numbers had not included. A 5th ship dropped out of faster-than-light travel, directly above the formation, like someone had thrown it through a hole in reality. It was not a big ship. It was smaller than any of the raiders' vessels. Single pilot, beaten up in a way that suggested a very long and eventful life. Its hull was a dull gray-brown, with patches of different metals, where sections had been replaced over the years. It had no markings, no flag, no identification signal. It came in fast, and it came in sideways, which was not a normal way for anything to come in. And before anyone had time to think about it, it had already opened fire on the nearest raider ship. Not with heavy weapons. It didn't have heavy weapons. It had 2 fast-firing short-range cannons, and it used them like someone who had been in too many of these situations to be afraid of them anymore. It moved constantly, never staying in one place long enough for the raiders to get a clean lock. It cut between 2 of them, fired into the 3rd, pulled a hard turn that should have been too tight for any ship that size, and somehow made it work. Valith watched this from her cockpit, with her mouth slightly open. The raiders had not expected a fight. They were used to easy targets, people who cut their engines and unlocked their cargo bays and cried. They were not ready for a single aggressive human ship that moved like a very angry insect. Within 90 seconds, one of their ships was venting fuel and pulling back. Another had taken enough hits to its drive system that it was sitting still in space, and not by choice. The remaining 2 broke off. They ran. They had not signed up for this. The small, battered ship circled the Selene once, slowly, then came up beside it and matched its speed. A hailing signal opened. Valith answered it before she had fully decided whether she should. The man on the other side of the channel was human. She had seen humans before, on mixed-species stations, in passing, in diplomatic briefings, but not often, and not like this. He had dark hair that needed cutting, and a jacket that had seen better years, and he was looking at his own display screen while he talked to her, like he was still checking something. "You okay over there?" he said. It was not the greeting she had expected. She had expected demands or warnings or offers with conditions attached. She had not expected that. "I am not damaged," she said carefully. "Your arrival was unexpected." "Yeah, I get that a lot," he said. He finally looked up at his camera. His eyes were dark and steady in a way that didn't match his casual tone. "Name's Ethan Cross. I was running an escort contract out this way. Contract fell through. You need a hand getting clear of this stretch?" Valith studied him on the screen. In Varith culture, no warrior of low standing would intervene in the business of a higher caste without being ordered to. There were rules about when help was offered, and by whom, and why. She had spent her whole life inside those rules. "You have no contract with me," she said. "You had no reason to engage those ships." Ethan shrugged, a motion she had seen humans make before, that seemed to mean many different things at once. "You looked like you needed it," he said. "That was reason enough for me." She was quiet for a moment. She was very rarely without something to say, but that sentence had taken the words away from her. "I am Valith Solkarath," she said at last. "Ethan Cross," he said again. Then, as if he felt the need to explain himself further, "Look, that formation is going to regroup. They always do when they think they've been embarrassed. You've got a nice ship, but it's not built for fighting, and I'm guessing you didn't come out here because you wanted to. Wherever you're going, you probably shouldn't go there alone." Nothing fancy, but it's safe enough, and the people there don't ask a lot of questions. Vaylith looked at Saris. Saris gave a very small nod. She looked back at Ethan Cross, this scruffy, unhurried human man who had driven off 4 armed ships because she looked like she needed it, and who was now offering her shelter with less ceremony than most Vareth servants offered tea. "I accept," she said. "Good," he said. "Stay close and try to match my speed. I'll take it slow." The 2 ships moved through the corridor together, the small, battered human fighter slightly ahead, and the elegant diplomatic courier following behind. Outside the windows, the gray corridor stretched on, dark and wide, and full of things waiting to go wrong. For the first time in 2 days, Vaylith felt something loosen very slightly in her chest. It was not safety. It was something smaller than those things, and maybe more honest. It was the feeling that she was not entirely alone. Port Callan was not the kind of place you found in any official guide. It sat at the far edge of a small asteroid belt, where 3 neutral territories met, but none of them quite managed to govern. It had been built up over about 40 years by different groups of people who all had the same basic need: somewhere to land that didn't ask for papers. It was not beautiful. It was a collection of pressurized modules, bolted together at different angles over different decades, with docking arms sticking out in every direction and cargo nets stretched between sections to catch loose debris. The lights inside were yellow and warm and slightly too bright. It smelled like engine oil, cooked food, and the specific kind of tired that came from people working very long hours. Vaylith had been inside Vareth stations that could fit 10,000 people. She had stood in rooms where the ceilings were so high they disappeared into shadow, and the floors were polished to a mirror finish. She had attended ceremonies in spaces designed to make everyone inside them feel small against the Empire's greatness. Port Callan made her feel something entirely different. It was loud in an alive kind of way. There were arguments happening near the cargo sorting bays, and laughter coming from somewhere further down a corridor, and the sound of someone's music floating through a vent. Nobody stopped when she and Saris walked in. Nobody stared at her the way people usually stared at a Vareth, that particular combination of wariness and forced politeness. A dock worker glanced up at her for a second and went back to his work. 2 children ran past, chasing something that had gotten loose from a cage. An older woman with a long gray braid sat on a crate and ate something from a bowl and nodded at Vaylith like they had met before. She was not sure what to do with any of this. Ethan brought her to the comms station, which was the most organized part of the outpost, a room full of screens and signal equipment and stacked reference manuals, run entirely by a woman named Amy Caldwell. Amy's human, somewhere in her mid-30s, with her hair pulled back and reading glasses pushed up on top of her head, even though she wasn't reading anything. She looked at Vaylith, and then at Ethan, and then back at Vaylith, and she said, "She's Vareth, Ethan." "I know," Ethan said. "There's going to be a flag the second her biometrics hit any scanner." "I know that too," Ethan said. Amy looked at Vaylith again with a completely different kind of attention. Not unkind, just extremely direct. "Are you in trouble?" she asked. Vaylith had been asked that question in 3 different ways since leaving the Empire, and had not yet answered it honestly. She answered it honestly now. "Yes," she said. Amy nodded, once, as if this confirmed something she had already decided. "Okay," she said. "I'll reroute the entry log. You've got a day or 2 before anyone looking hard would find the gap. That should give us time to figure out what to do." She turned back to her screens and started working. There was no ceremony about it, no conditions offered, no waiting to see if there was something in it for her. Vaylith stood there for a moment. She had been raised to understand that help always had a cost. Everything in the Vareth Empire had a cost. Favors, protection, alliances, even kindness. It was given when it was useful, and withdrawn when it wasn't. She had accepted this as simply the nature of things. She was beginning to suspect it was not the nature of all things, just the nature of the things she had always been surrounded by. She was given a small room near the station's inner ring. It was very small. The bed was narrow, and the ceiling was low, and the walls had been painted over so many times in so many colors that the surface had texture like bark. She sat on the edge of the bed and felt the quiet, and found that she did not mind the smallness. It felt, strangely, like something she could hold on to. For 3 days she stayed quiet, and watched, and tried to understand the shape of Port Callan. She helped Saris carry supplies once, and nobody made a point of it. She sat in the common area one evening, and listened to a group of traders argue about a navigation route, and someone handed her a cup of something hot without asking if she wanted it, and she drank it, and it tasted terrible, and she said so. And the man who had given it to her laughed, and said yes, that was fair. It was terrible, but it was warm. She almost smiled. Ethan, meanwhile, was not sitting still. He had started pulling at the thread of the raider attack from the moment they docked. The attack had been too clean for opportunistic pirates. The raiders had known the Solen's exact signature. They had come from the right angle, at the right moment, with the right number of ships for a quiet job. Someone had given them a target. He spent 2 days making quiet calls through channels Amy set up for him, former colleagues, contacts on neutral stations, a couple of people in places that didn't officially exist. On the 3rd day, he sat down across from Valeth, in the small eating area off the main corridor, and put a data tablet on the table between them. The ship that hired the raiders, he said, registered to a private charter out of Vareth Inner Space. The charter traces back through 2 shell companies to an office that runs money for Vareth military intelligence. Valeth looked at the tablet. She looked at the names on the screen. She was not surprised. She was something worse than surprised. She was confirmed. Doron, she said. Your brother? Yes. Ethan leaned back and crossed his arms. He doesn't just want you out, he said. He wants you gone. You know something, or he thinks you know something. I know what he did, she said quietly. I cannot yet prove it, but he does not know what I can and cannot prove, and so he is being careful. Ethan was quiet for a moment. Then, Amy's voice came through the wall speaker. Calm, but with something tight underneath it. Ethan, you're going to want to see this. They went to the comms room. On the main screen was a sensor feed from the corridor outside Port Callan's approach lane. A ship was moving toward them. Not a raider ship. It was much larger than that. Its hull was deep gray, with the markings of the Vareth Imperial Navy running along its port side in silver. A cruiser. Commander Harith's name appeared on the identification signal when Ethan ran it through Amy's database. Amy pulled up what she could find on him in about 90 seconds. Vareth Navy, career officer, attached to Doran's command division for the last 6 years. They found her, Amy said. How long before they're at docking range? Ethan asked. 40 minutes, maybe 50. Ethan looked at Valeth. Valeth looked at the screen. The ship out there was carrying at least 200 soldiers, and enough firepower to turn Port Callan into pieces without much effort. And she was here with 1 borrowed room, no seal, no fleet, and no standing under any law that applied to this patch of space. I should go, Valeth said. Her voice was flat. If I leave, they will follow me and not trouble this place. Where will you go? Ethan asked. She had no answer to that. Ethan looked at the screen for a long moment. Then he looked at Amy, who was already looking at him with an expression that said she knew exactly what he was going to say, and was already thinking about how to help him do it. Nobody's going anywhere, Ethan said. Not yet. Give me 40 minutes. Valeth opened her mouth to tell him this was not his problem, and not his fight, and not his responsibility. She had all the words ready. She looked at his face, and she stopped. There was something in his expression that was very quiet and very decided, and it had nothing to do with strategy or advantage or cost. It was just a man who had looked at an unfair situation and made a choice. She did not say what she had been going to say. 40 minutes, she agreed. Ethan moved fast, but he did not look panicked. Valith had noticed this about him over the past 3 days. He had a way of moving through difficult moments that was not calm exactly, but was grounded. Like he had already accepted that things were going to be hard and had decided to work from there. He went to Amy first. I need a full open-channel broadcast, strong enough to hit every neutral station and press relay in 200 light minutes. Amy looked at him over her glasses. That will light us up like a flare. Good, Ethan said. I want them to see us. She turned back to her screens and started preparing the signal without another word. Then Ethan went to Valith. I need everything you know, he said. Everything about Doran, the Yaren mission, the charge, the codes, the timeline, all of it, recorded on camera in your own words, as much as you can give me in 20 minutes. You want to broadcast it. I want to put it somewhere nobody can unsee it, he said. Once it's out there, killing you doesn't fix Doran's problem anymore. It just makes it worse for him. She had thought of this herself, in the long, quiet nights of the last week. She had thought of it and dismissed it, because she had no platform, no allies, no one who would carry the signal or care about receiving it. She was a disgraced exile. Her word meant nothing. But something had shifted. She looked at Ethan, at this human man she had known for 4 days, who had no stake in Vareth politics and no personal history with her, and no reason to put his outpost in front of an Imperial cruiser. And she thought that maybe the value of a testimony was not only about the rank of the person giving it. Maybe it was also about the people willing to stand next to them when they spoke. All right, she said. A small camera, a steady signal, and Valith in a chair, with her hands folded on the table and her eyes steady. She spoke for 18 minutes. She went through everything, the mission timeline, the codes that had been accessed without her order, the name of the Vareth officer she had seen near the station's lower bay on the morning of the explosion, the records she had filed that had been altered in the official investigation report. She was precise and she was calm, and she spoke in both Vareth and Standard Common so that the message could be understood across species. When she finished, Amy had the signal ready. Sending on every open channel, Amy said. Neutral station relays, independent press networks, open diplomatic lines. She paused. There are 3 Vareth Noble House frequencies in range. They'll receive it too. Send it. The signal went out. Outside, the Imperial cruiser was 16 minutes from docking approach. Ethan did not wait for the cruiser to arrive. He pulled on his jacket, checked the sidearm at his hip, and walked down to the main docking bay at the front of the station. The bay was long and wide, with a row of docked ships along the inner wall and a sealed outer door that separated Port Callan from the vacuum beyond. When the cruiser sent a docking request, the door would have to open. Ethan stood in front of it and waited. Amy's voice reached him through the comm in his ear. Ethan, they're hailing us. HerHFY is asking for immediate access and extradition of Valith Salkareth under Imperial Fugitive Code. Tell him I heard him, Ethan said. A pause. Then, he wants to know who you are. Tell him I'm the man in the docking bay. He heard the connection open, and then a new voice, cold and heavy and accustomed to giving orders, came through the speaker mounted near the door. Commander HerHFY. Mr. Cross, step aside. This does not involve you. With respect, Ethan said, I'm standing in my own station's docking bay. I think it involves me a little bit. You are one man, HerHFY said. You have no fleet, no legal authority, and nothing that can stop this vessel. Step aside, or I will step you aside. Ethan didn't move. He heard HerHFY give a short, unimpressed sound, the kind of sound powerful people made when they encountered something small that was taking too long to remove. And then he heard the clank and hiss of the cruiser's docking arm beginning to extend. And then he heard something else. Footsteps. Behind him. He turned around. Port Callan was not a large place. It had maybe 230 permanent residents on any given day. Dock workers, traders, repair crews, a few families, some retired people who had come to the edge of known space because it was quiet. They were not soldiers. They were not fighters. Most of them had come here specifically because they were done with things like empires and wars and orders from above. They had heard everything on the open speaker system that ran through the whole station. They had been listening. They came in ones and twos, and then more. A dockworker named Cole, with a heavy wrench resting on his shoulder. A retired freighter captain named Donna, who had the specific look of someone who had been in trouble before and was not particularly afraid of it. 3 repair technicians, who had brought tools that were no longer being used for repairs. 2 alien traders who had been at Port Callan for a week, waiting for a cargo connection, and had apparently decided this was as good a reason to stay as any. Old Pete from the food bay, who everyone called Old Pete, carrying nothing except himself, and the look of a man who had decided where he stood. Valeth was with them. She had come out of the comms room and walked through the station, and people had followed her, and she had not asked them to. She stood now at the edge of the group, and she looked at Ethan, and Ethan looked at her. "You were supposed to stay back," he said. "I decided not to," she said simply. He almost smiled. He turned back to the door. When Harith's soldiers came through, they found every entry point blocked, not with weapons emplacements or military barriers, but with people, crates and equipment and bodies, and the firm, unmovable presence of people who had made a choice. The soldiers were trained and they were armed. But they were also walking into a narrow, pressurized station, where every corridor was an ambush, and every corner belonged to someone who knew the space. What followed was loud and difficult and ungraceful. Ethan moved through the station the way he flew his ship, constantly, unpredictably, using the space itself as a weapon. Bulkhead doors sealed at the right moment. A coolant line was cracked in a junction corridor and filled a passageway with thick fog. Valeth fought beside him, and when she fought, it was something to see. 17 years of Vareth combat training, moving in a corridor built for repair crews, fast and precise and completely without hesitation. They held the station for 51 minutes. Then Amy's voice came through the comm, and it was different, lighter, almost disbelieving. "Ethan, HerHFY just got a signal. It's a council order. 3 Vareth noble houses filed a formal investigation petition 20 minutes ago. They received our broadcast. Harith is being recalled, pending the inquiry." The fighting stopped the way water stops when a dam opens. Not all at once, but quickly, moving towards stillness. Harith's soldiers pulled back to the cruiser. Harith himself stood in the outer docking arm for a moment before the seal closed, and Valeth was there to see it. She held his gaze, and she did not look away. He was the one who looked away first. The cruiser disengaged and moved off into the dark. Port Callan was still standing. It was battered. Some sections had damage. One corridor was going to need full repair, and 3 people had been hurt badly enough to need the station's small medical bay. But it was standing, and the people in it were standing, and nobody had been taken. Ethan sat down on a cargo crate in the middle of the docking bay. He was bleeding from a cut on his jaw that he hadn't noticed until now. Valeth walked over and sat beside him. The rest of Port Callan moved around them slowly, checking on each other, talking in low voices, the way people did after something difficult had passed. "You're injured," Valeth said. "It's not bad," Ethan said. She looked at him for a moment. Then she said quietly, "Why did they come, the people here? Nobody ordered them." Ethan pressed his sleeve against the cut and thought about it. "Because I asked," he said, "and because you asked. And because people who've spent their lives being pushed around by bigger things recognize an unfair situation when they see one." He paused. "And because that's what people do, at least the good ones." Valeth looked at the docking bay floor for a long moment. "I have never been in a place like this," she said. I have never fought beside people who came because they chose to. How does it feel? Ethan asked. She considered the question honestly. Like something I did not know I was missing, she said. The days after the fight were slower and quieter, but they were not still. Port Callan spent the first day patching itself up. The damaged corridor was sealed and rerouted. The docking bay door got a new locking mechanism. Donna, the retired freighter captain who had stood in the bay with a length of pipe and the expression of someone calmly attending a slightly inconvenient errand, organized the repair teams with the efficiency of someone who had done this before, which she had. Old Pete reopened the food bay by mid-morning, and the line went out the door because everyone was suddenly very hungry in the specific way that came after surviving something. Valith helped where she could. She was not sure at first what that meant in a place like this. She had no repair skills, no cooking skills, and very limited knowledge of how Port Callan's systems ran. But she could lift things. She could carry medical supplies between rooms. She could sit with one of the injured traders, a quiet alien named Voss, who had cracked 2 ribs in the corridor fight, and keep him company while the station's medic worked on the section nearby. She found that she liked having small, useful things to do. She had spent most of her life doing things of great official importance, and almost none of it had felt like this. Amy was in the comms room around the clock for 3 days, monitoring the signal traffic. The broadcast had gone far. It had reached every neutral press relay in the region, which meant it had been picked up, copied, and resent by independent journalists and information brokers who had no loyalty to the Vareth Empire and every reason to find the story interesting. By the second day, it had been received inside Vareth inner space. By the third day, it was on the public networks. The 3 noble houses that had filed the investigation petition were old and influential. Houses that had watched Crown Prince Duran accumulate power for years with growing unease, and had been looking for a reason and a moment to push back. Valith's testimony gave them both. The council, under the weight of 3 major houses and an open investigation, had no clean way to dismiss it. Duran was not arrested, not yet. He had too many people protecting him for it to happen quickly. But the investigation was real, and it had weight, and a pressure had shifted. Valith could feel it in the messages that began arriving, carefully worded, from addresses she recognized, from people who had been silent during her exile, and were now finding their voices again. She read each one, sitting in her small room at the end of the day. On the 4th night after the fight, Ethan climbed up to the roof of the station's control module, which was technically the highest accessible point on Port Callan, and offered a view of the asteroid belt and the stars beyond it. Valith found him there by following Ceres, who had found him first, and was sitting nearby with a blanket and 2 cups of the terrible hot drink that seemed to be available everywhere on this station at all hours. She sat down beside Ethan. The view from up here was genuinely beautiful. The belt was far enough away that the rocks caught the light of a distant star and turned it into a slow-moving scatter of sparks. It was very quiet. Amy says the council has issued a formal review of your exile, Ethan said. I know, Valith said. She told me. The noble houses want you to come back as a witness for the investigation. Amy looked at the stars. What are you going to do? She had been asking herself that for 2 days. Going back meant returning to a system that had thrown her out without a trial, surrounded by people who had chosen their positions carefully and would change them again when it was useful. It meant being a witness first and a fighter second. It meant doing the slow, grinding work of reforming something from inside that had nearly destroyed her from the outside. Staying meant this: Port Callan, small rooms, bad hot drinks, real help on an ordinary scale. It meant Ethan Cross, and Amy Caldwell, and Donna, and old Pete, and 230 people who had come to a docking bay because someone had asked. She looked at the belt and the stars for a while before she answered. "I am going back," she said, "not for my title. I do not want my title back, not the way it was. But Doron has to answer for what he did to the Yaren. 41 people died because of a political game he played, and I am the only one with the full account of what happened. The only one willing to stand in front of the council and say his name out loud." Ethan nodded slowly. "And after?" he asked. "I don't know yet," she said. "I have learned recently that not knowing what comes next is not the worst thing." She paused. "It used to terrify me. Now it is just an open space." Ethan turned his cup in his hands. "You know, when I was growing up on Earth, they taught us a lot of history. Most of it was pretty dark. Humans spent thousands of years finding new and creative ways to hurt each other over every difference they could think of. And at the end of all that, after all the wars and the walls and the things people did that they shouldn't have, the one thing that most of us agreed on was simple." He stopped for a moment. "You don't leave someone alone in the dark if you can help it. It's not a law. It's not a contract. It's not something any government decided. It's just something people figured out mattered." Valeth was quiet. She let those words sit for a long time. She had spent 17 years trying to understand what she believed in. She had been told it was the Empire. Then she had been told it was duty. Then she had been told it was rank and order and hierarchy, and the idea that strength flowed from the top down. And all of it had sounded true right up until the moment none of it protected her. What Ethan was describing was different. It was not a rule handed down from above. It was just a choice that people made, over and over again, in small moments and large ones, because they had decided it mattered. She had seen it in the docking bay. She had felt it when Saras picked up his travel case and didn't explain himself. She had felt it when Amy rerouted an entry log for a stranger without asking what was in it for her. It was the thing she had been looking for inside the Vareth Empire all along, without knowing what to call it. "I would like to hire you," she said, "properly. A formal contract, fair payment." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "To do what?" "To fly beside me," she said, "back to the inner systems, through whatever comes next." He was quiet for a moment. "I'm not a diplomat," he said. "I'm not polished. I'll say the wrong thing in formal settings, and I will absolutely not bow to anyone." "I know," she said. "My ship needs 3 repairs before it should technically be making long jumps. Amy told me. I will cover the repairs. My rate is 400 credits a day plus expenses." Valeth looked at him. "I will pay 800. Ethan looked back at her. Then he looked at Saras, who was quietly watching them both with amber eyes that held, if she was not mistaken, a small and very satisfied look. "All right," Ethan said. "When do we leave?" "Tomorrow morning," she said. He nodded and looked back at the stars. She did the same. They sat up there for a while longer, the two of them, and Saras and the bad hot drink, and the quiet light of the belt moving across the dark. It was not a grand moment. There were no banners, no ceremony, no official record being made. There was just the night and the stars, and the very ordinary-looking beginning of something that was going to matter. The next morning, Valeth walked the Selene out of its docking berth at Port Callan for the first time since she had arrived. Amy stood at the comm station and watched them go, and she said nothing sentimental, which was exactly right. Donna waved from the floor of the docking bay. Old Pete had packed them food for the journey, the good food this time, not whatever it was he served in the common area. Ethan's ship came up beside the Selene at the edge of the belt and fell into formation off her port side. He matched her speed without being asked. The two ships held steady together, facing the open dark ahead. Valeth set the course. Not back to the Empire, not yet. First to a neutral station, where she could properly file her testimony with independent witnesses present, where no one could make it disappear. Then whatever came after that. The Solène moved forward. Ethan moved with her. Outside the windows, the stars spread open in every direction, enormous and patient and full of possibility, the way the universe always was when you stopped waiting for someone else to tell you where you were allowed to go. Veilith Sol Careth, no seal, no fleet, no rank, pressed her hand flat against her coat pocket, where a small woven token still waited.